The engineers also found that there's an asymmetry in our tolerance for this misalignment. We don't really At the 1939 World's Fair in New York, the exciting new tech was the live television broadcast. Roosevelt became the first president to address the nation live on TV. But for years leading up to this event, engineers had been working on one particular technical problem: how to ensure the audio and video remained perfectly synced during the live broadcast. Without this, words and lip movements wouldn't match up, which would be annoying and distracting for viewers. So, how did they do it? Well, actually, they didn't. Instead, they discovered something pretty incredible. We are not very good at discerning whether audio and video are in sync. For example, I intentionally delayed the audio of this entire monologue nearly 1/10 of a second. And did you notice? I'll clap to make it more obvious. The engineers also found that there's an asymmetry in our tolerance for this misalignment. We don't really notice if the sound lags video by up to 125 milliseconds, but we can tell something is wrong if it's leading the video by more than 45 milliseconds. And to understand why, take a look at this. Here I am bouncing a basketball as I walk away from the camera. The sight and the sound of the bounces match up perfectly. But as I walk away, you know the sound will be increasingly delayed due to the extra time it takes the sound to reach the camera. But the sound still appears synced. This is because your brain is not reporting to you each instant exactly as it happens, but rather a short interval of time reorganized to make sense. So in this case, your brain automatically aligns the sound with the sight of the bounce, at least up to a point. Once I'm over 30 meters away, the sound is now delayed by over 100 milliseconds, and your brain no longer integrates the information from your eyes and ears. Here, let me play the actual sound of the bounce together with the sound as received by the camera. This explains why sound can lag video by more than it can lead. I mean, imagine you were at a basketball game, and because of how far away you're sitting, the sound is delayed. Your brain can handle that, but if the sound precedes the sight of an event, that would look really odd, because that's something that would never happen in nature. This is why the broadcast guidelines for acceptable audio and video mismatches are skewed in favor of audio lagging behind the video. Our brains are good at aligning audio with the vision that preceded it. We can actually exploit our auto-syncing capabilities to produce some strange results. For example, we created this computer program where when you press the spacebar, a light appears on the screen. But not immediately. There is an 80 millisecond delay between the button push and the light coming on. In a study, participants who familiarized themselves with a similar program came to believe that the light turned on immediately after they pushed the button, just as our brains synchronize the sight and sound of the basketball bounce.
Press the space key once to begin. This is just the section where you get the idea of what it does, so you push the space bar.
Now watch what happens when you remove the delay.
That last one came up without me even pressing anything.
You didn't press anything and it just flashed up there.
Right.
Some participants were convinced that the light came on before they pushed the button. They believed that something else caused the light to come on, even though it was their action that made it happen. This is remarkable because causality, the idea that one thing leads to another, is fundamental to our understanding of the world. Otherwise, how would we know who shot first? Babies as young as 8 months can demonstrate an understanding of causality. When watching a caregiver wind a music box, if the music stops, the babies touch the caregiver's hand to get the music to start again. Causality is something we're hardwired to recognize. But even this core part of our brains can be fooled. The flash lag effect gives further insight into how this happens. Stare at the red square in the middle of the screen, and remember what you see when the flash happens. Where was the ring when the flash occurred? If you're like most people, you probably saw the flash in the top half of the ring. But what actually happened was the flash appeared in the exact center of the ring. So our perception of the flash seems to be delayed. To explain this result, scientists hypothesized that the brain was anticipating motion. You see the flash behind the ring because your brain is predicting where the ring will be, not where it actually is when the flash happens. To test this hypothesis, neuroscientist David Eagleman and his team modified the experiment so that the ring reverses direction right at the moment of the flash. Now what did you see? If the brain was predicting the motion of the ring, you should have seen exactly the same thing as before, with the flash on the top side of the ring. But most people see it in the bottom half of the ring. How is this possible, considering all the frames leading up to the flash were exactly the same in both cases? If our brains were anticipating motion, then we would have had to somehow known in advance that the ring was going to reverse direction. And that seems impossible. So the alternative hypothesis is that where we see the flash occur depends on what happens after the flash. There is a delay between the flash occurring and you perceiving it, and the stuff that happens during that delay is actually incorporated into your perception of the event. This is incredibly counterintuitive, and it calls into question our perceptions of causality. The underlying cause of all of these illusions is the same. What we perceive as the present is not just one moment, but a short interval of time, which is around 1/10 of a second long. Now, during this period, your brain can perform manipulations that distort your perception of time and rearrange causality. This interval has been called the specious present, a term coined by E. Robert Kelly all the way back in 1882. He said, "All the notes of a bar of a song seem to the listener to be contained in the present. All the changes of place of a meteor seem to the beholder to be contained in the present." The present is really a part of the past, a recent past, delusively given as being a time that intervenes between the past and the future. Let it be named the specious present. Why do we experience time in this illusory way? We feel like we're living in each instant, but what we're actually experiencing is a short period of time. I think it's not so that our brains can sync up the sight and sound of distant events, or so we can watch TV and movies without distractions, but because fundamentally our brains need to hold multiple moments at once to make sense of the world. Just as you can't read a book letter by letter, you can't make sense of the world and form memories instant by instant. So we live in the specious present, under the illusion that we experience each moment exactly as it happens. Hey, a lot of the research in this episode was performed by neuroscientist David Eagleman. And he's actually written a book entitled The Brain, the Story of You, which includes a lot of the details of his research. So if you want to know more about these topics, I highly recommend you check out his book. And in fact, you can download it for free by going to audible.com/Veritasium, where this book is read by David Eagleman himself. But if you're not interested in this one, you can also pick any other book of your choosing for a 1-month free trial. Audible is a great audiobook website with hundreds of thousands of titles in all areas of literature, including fiction, nonfiction, and periodicals. Plus, Audible is a longtime supporter of Veritasium, so I really want to thank them for helping me to keep doing what I'm doing and making these videos. And I want to thank you for watching. For most of us, thinking is at least somewhat unpleasant. We try to avoid it where possible. For example, I asked these guys, how long does it take for the Earth to go around the sun?
What do you reckon, cuz?
Is it 24 hours?
Obviously a day, yes.
Or take this problem, which has been given to thousands of college students.
You go into a toy store, and there's a toy bat and a toy ball. Together they cost $1.10. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost?
10 cents.
We're all wrong, aren't we?
If you think about it for just a second, it's obvious that the ball can't cost 10 cents. Because if it did, then the bat would cost $1.10 and the two items together would cost $1.20. The correct answer is 5 cents. Now, the point of these questions is not that they're difficult. Any of these people could have quickly checked their answer if they wanted to. The point is that they don't check, because thinking is uncomfortable. It takes effort.
Hey, the Earth doesn't take one day to get around the sun. It takes like a year.
Now, I think it would be easy to put these mistakes down to stupidity and believe that you, being much smarter, could never fall into such traps. But then I think you'd be fooling yourself. I think these examples reveal blind spots in all of our thinking due to the fundamental way that our brains work. Now, one way of modeling how the brain operates is as though there are two systems at work. Psychologists call them System 1 and System 2, but maybe it's useful to think of them as characters. So let's call System 1 Gun and System 2 Drew. You are Drew. He represents your conscious thought, the voice in your head. I am who you think you are. He's the one capable of following instructions. He can execute a series of steps. If you're asked to calculate 13 times 17 in your head, for example, he's the one who has to do it.
Can I just use my calculator?
No.
All right. 17 times.
Drew is lazy. It takes effort to get Drew to do anything, and he is slow. But he's the careful one, capable of catching and fixing mistakes.
221.
Now meet System 1, Gun. He is incredibly quick, which he needs to be since he's constantly processing copious amounts of information coming in through your senses. He picks out the relevant bits and discards the rest, which is most of it. And he works automatically, without you, Drew, being consciously aware of what he is doing. For example, when you spot some text, he reads it before you can even decide whether or not you want to read it. Gun fills in the gaps. For example, what does this say? Did you notice that the H in the and the A in cat are actually the same symbol? But you had no trouble reading it because Gun made the correct automatic assumption. So although Drew is unaware of what Gun is doing, it's Gun's perceptions that become the basis for your conscious thoughts. The way I like to think of it, each of these characters is related to one of your main memory structures. Gun's automatic responses are made possible by long-term memory, the library of experiences you've built up over your lifetime. In contrast, Drew exists entirely within working memory, so he's only capable of holding 4 or 5 novel things in mind at a time. This is perhaps one of the best known findings from psychology, that our capacity to hold and manipulate novel information is incredibly limited, like when trying to remember a string of random numbers.
6, 7, 5, 5, 3, 1.
Yes. But we are able to overcome these limitations if the information is familiar to us. For example, let me give you 4 random digits, 7, 1, 0, 2. Now these would normally take up most of your working memory capacity just to remember, but if you reverse them, 2017, they are now just one thing, the present year. The process of grouping things together according to your prior knowledge is called chunking, and you can actually hold 4 or 5 chunks in working memory at once. So the larger the chunks, the more information you can actively manipulate at one time. Learning is then the process of building more and bigger chunks by storing and further connecting information in long-term memory, essentially passing off tasks from Drew to Gun. But in order for this to happen, Drew first has to engage with the information actively and effortfully, often multiple times. For example, when you were first learning to tie your shoelaces, you probably recited a rhyme to help you remember what to do next, using up all your working memory in the process. But after doing it over and over and over again, it gradually became automatic. That is, Drew doesn't have to think about it anymore because Gun's got it. Musicians and sports stars refer to this as muscle memory, though of course the memory is not in the muscles, it's still in the brain, just controlled by Gun.
You can practice everything exactly as it is and exactly as it's written, but at just such a speed that you have to think about and know exactly where you are and what your fingers are doing and what it feels like.
Slow, deliberate, conscious practice repeated often enough leads to this. I bet 99% of the time, what appears to be superhuman ability comes down to the incredible automation skills of Gun, developed through the painstaking, deliberate practice of Drew. What's interesting is it's actually possible to see how hard Drew is working just by looking at someone. Try this task. I'm going to show you 4 digits. I want you to read them out loud, and then after 2 beats, I want you to say each number back on the beat, but adding 1 to each digit. So as an example, 7291 should be 8302. This is called the add 1 task, and it forces Drew to hold these digits in memory while making manipulations to them. Now it's important to say the numbers back on the beat. Try this one. To make it harder, you can try adding 3 instead of 1. Ready? Now what you're unaware of is that as you're completing this task, your pupils are dilating. When Drew is hard at work, as he is in this task, you have a physiological response, including increased heart rate, sweat production, and pupil dilation. Watch how the pupils of these participants enlarge as they perform the add 1 and add 3 tasks.
4